Hi guys, the night is quiet. Far above the desert, countless stars hang over the dark land of Egypt. The air has finally cooled after a long day beneath the sun. The Nile River moves softly through the darkness, its waters reflecting small pieces of moonlight as they drift slowly south and north between fields, villages, temples, and sleeping homes. Along the riverbanks, most people are already asleep. Inside simple mud-brick houses, families rest on woven mats. A faint breeze slips through narrow windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and then becomes silent again. The last cooking fires have nearly burned away. Only a few glowing embers remain. For many ancient Egyptians, this quiet hour was precious. The day ahead would begin long before sunrise. And so tonight, as the stars shine above the river and the warm desert wind drifts gently across the fields, we travel back into one of the oldest civilizations in human history. Not to visit great kings. Not to witness famous battles. But to spend time with ordinary people. Farmers. Builders. Fishermen. Scribes. Mothers baking bread before dawn. Children carrying water. Workers returning home with tired feet and dusty clothing. Their lives were shaped by something larger than any ruler. The seasons. Every year, the land changed. The river changed. The weather changed. The work changed. And survival depended on understanding each part of the cycle. Life in Egypt was never separated from nature. The Nile River was not simply a river. It was a living rhythm that guided almost every activity. People watched it carefully. They spoke about it often. They depended on it completely. Without the Nile, the surrounding land would have been mostly dry desert stretching endlessly beneath the sun. Yet each year, the river transformed the landscape. Dark fertile soil appeared where dry ground had existed before. Fields became green. Crops grew. Animals found grazing land. Families gathered harvests. Entire communities survived because of this yearly pattern. For thousands of years, Egyptians organized their lives around three major seasons. The season of flooding. The season of growing. And the season of harvest. Each brought its own challenges. Each demanded different kinds of labor. Each shaped the daily routine of nearly every person living beside the river. Long before modern calendars, people learned to recognize these changes through careful observation. They watched the water. They studied the sky. They noticed the winds. They paid attention to birds, insects, plants, and distant weather. Knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. A father taught his son. A mother taught her daughter. Neighbors shared experience. Elders remembered patterns from decades before. And so life continued. Slowly. Patiently. Year after year. As the night deepens around us, imagine standing near a small village beside the Nile. The homes are built from mud bricks dried beneath the sun. Their walls are thick enough to help keep the heat outside during the hottest months. Flat roofs provide useful spaces where people sometimes sit during cooler evenings. Narrow streets wind between the houses. Goats sleep nearby. A few donkeys rest beside simple fences. Everything feels still. But before long, movement will begin. The first workers will wake. The first fires will be lit. The first bread dough will be prepared. And another day will begin. In ancient Egypt, mornings often arrived before sunrise. The coolest hours were valuable. People wanted to complete difficult tasks before the heat became too strong. Even in the darkness before dawn, activity slowly appeared. A woman rises from her sleeping mat. The floor beneath her feet feels cool. She moves quietly so she does not wake everyone else. Outside, the stars remain visible. She kneels beside a grinding stone. Soon the soft sound of grain being crushed fills the room. Back and forth. Back and forth. Steady. Rhythmic. Patient. Making flour was hard work. It required strength and endurance. Many women spent countless hours preparing grain in this way. The movement became part of daily life. A familiar sound heard throughout villages before sunrise. Nearby, someone lights a small lamp. Its gentle glow pushes back the darkness. A pot is prepared. Water is gathered. Bread dough begins to take shape. The smell of baking will soon drift through the village. Not far away, a farmer opens his eyes. His body already feels tired from yesterday's labor. His hands are rough. His shoulders ache. Yet there is work to be done. There is always work to be done. He steps outside. The eastern horizon is beginning to brighten. Birds call from reeds along the river. The world slowly wakes. During different seasons, this farmer's responsibilities change. When floodwaters cover the fields, he cannot plant crops. When the waters retreat, planting begins. When crops mature, harvest becomes urgent. Every season demands attention. Every season requires preparation. The flooding season was perhaps the most important. Each year, distant rains far to the south caused the Nile to rise. The water slowly expanded beyond its usual banks. Fields disappeared beneath broad sheets of water. What might seem dangerous at first was actually essential. The flood brought rich soil. Dark sediment settled across the land. When waters eventually withdrew, fertility remained behind. This natural process renewed the fields year after year. For farmers, the arrival of floodwaters changed daily life. Some agricultural work paused. Other tasks took its place. Canals needed maintenance. Tools required repair. Homes sometimes needed attention after exposure to moisture. Communities adapted. People understood the rhythm. The flood was not an unexpected event. It was part of life. Children grew up expecting it. Grandparents remembered countless floods before. Entire villages adjusted their schedules around it. During these months, boats became even more important. Travel by water connected communities across great distances. Merchants moved goods. Officials carried messages. Fishermen searched for catches in changing waters. Boat builders remained busy. The Nile became a wide moving road. Imagine standing beside the river during the season. The morning sun rises slowly above the horizon. Its reflection stretches across the flood waters. Small boats glide quietly through the golden light. Voices carry gently across the water. Wood creaks softly. Oars dip into the river. Everything moves at an unhurried pace. The air smells fresh. Wet earth mixes with river reeds. A breeze drifts across the water. For a moment, the world feels peaceful. Yet beneath this calm surface lies constant work. Ancient Egypt depended upon effort. Nearly everything required physical labor. Food did not appear automatically. Water had to be carried. Buildings had to be maintained. Fields had to be prepared. Animals had to be cared for. Daily survival demanded energy. During flood season, builders often found opportunities for other projects. Some workers traveled to larger construction sites. Others repaired local structures. Stonecutters continued shaping blocks. Carpenters continued their craft. Potters shaped clay vessels. Life never completely stopped. It simply shifted direction. In workshops, craftsmen worked through long days. The sounds of labor filled the air. Stone scraping stone. Wood being shaped. Clay turning beneath skilled hands. These sounds became familiar parts of daily life. A young apprentice watches carefully. His teacher demonstrates a technique learned years earlier. Mistakes are corrected patiently. Skills develop slowly. Knowledge survives because someone takes time to pass it forward. Outside, the sun climbs higher. Heat begins to gather across the land. By midday, shadows become short. The air grows heavy. Workers wipe sweat from their faces. Many pause briefly when possible. Even those accustomed to Egypt's climate respected the power of the sun. Shade became valuable. Water became essential. People adjusted their routines accordingly. In homes throughout the villages, meals were prepared. Bread remained a staple food. Simple ingredients formed the foundation of daily eating. Families gathered when work allowed. Conversations remained practical. There were crops to discuss. Water levels to observe. Tools to repair. Animals to monitor. Life required attention. And so people remained busy. Yet moments of rest still existed. As afternoon slowly moved toward evening, temperatures gradually softened. Long shadows returned. The harsh brightness of midday faded. Workers began making their way home. Dusty roads carried steady streams of people. Some carried tools. Some carried baskets. Some carried fish. Others carried little more than their exhaustion. Children played nearby. Animals stirred. Cooking fires appeared one by one. Smoke drifted gently into the evening sky. The village changed character as daylight faded. The pace slowed. Voices softened. The smell of bread and cooking vegetables filled the air. People sat together. Stories were shared. Not dramatic stories. Not grand tales. Often simple memories. Conversations about work. Observations about weather. Small events from daily life. The ordinary moments that quietly connect people to one another. Above them, the sky darkened. Stars emerged. The cycle continued. Tomorrow would bring another day. And beyond tomorrow waited another season. One season flowing gently into the next. Just as the Nile itself flowed onward through the centuries. As floodwaters eventually receded, a new stage of the year began. The field slowly emerged once more. Dark soil covered the ground. Moisture remained beneath the surface. This was the moment farmers had been waiting for. Now the season of growing could begin. Before sunrise, villages became busy again. People gathered seeds. Animals were prepared. Tools were inspected. Fields that had disappeared beneath water were now ready for planting. The work was demanding. But it carried hope. Every seed represented future food. Every planted field represented survival. The growing season required patience. Farmers could not force crops to mature quickly. Nature followed its own pace. People worked carefully and then waited. They watched. They observed. They hoped for favorable conditions. Each morning, the fields stretched quietly beneath the sky. Rows of young plants emerged from the dark earth. The Nile flowed nearby. Birds crossed overhead. The world seemed calm. Yet countless hours of labor supported this peaceful scene. And as the days continued to pass beneath the Egyptian sun, families prepared themselves for whatever the next season might bring. The rhythm of survival never truly stopped. It simply moved forward with the river, the fields, the wind, and the turning year. The young plants stood quietly in the fields. Morning light spread across the land in soft bands of gold, touching the dark soil left behind by the flood. Thin layers of mist sometimes hovered above the water before the sun rose fully into the sky. For a brief time each day, the world felt cool and gentle. These early hours were treasured. A farmer walking to his field before sunrise could hear many small sounds that disappeared later in the day. Birds called from the reeds. Water lapped softly against the riverbank. Sandals brushed against dusty paths somewhere nearby. A donkey shifted its weight and shook its head. The village slowly awakened. A woman stepped outside carrying a clay jar. A child followed behind her. They walked toward a community well, moving through narrow lanes between mud-brick walls still cool from the night. Above them, the sky brightened little by little. The day had not yet become difficult. But everyone knew it would. As the growing season continued, nearly every family depended on careful daily work. Fields required attention. Water channels needed monitoring. Tools broke and needed repair. Animals wandered and had to be guided. Grain stores required protection from pests. The work rarely felt dramatic. It was simply constant. One task leading quietly into another. A farmer might spend much of the morning checking his crops. He walked slowly between rows of growing plants. His eyes searched for signs of trouble. Perhaps an area needed more water. Perhaps an animal had damaged a section during the night. Perhaps insects had appeared. Nothing could be ignored for long. A season's success depended upon many small decisions. Nearby, another worker repaired an irrigation channel. The Nile gave life to the land, but water still needed guidance. Canals and ditches helped carry precious moisture where it was needed. Over time, mud shifted. Banks weakened. Small blockages formed. Maintenance never ended. Men worked with simple tools beneath the morning sun. They dug carefully. They moved earth. They shaped the channels once more. Their feet became coated in damp mud. Their clothing collected dust. The work was tiring. Yet it was familiar. Many had been performing similar tasks since childhood. The rhythm lived in their muscles. Along the river, fishermen began another day. Their boats drifted quietly through calm water. Nets rested nearby. The Nile offered many kinds of fish, providing valuable food for countless communities. Fishing demanded patience. Hours could pass with little excitement. The river moved steadily. Birds circled overhead. Sunlight shimmered across gentle waves. A fisherman learned to observe everything. Changes in water movement. Changes in weather. Changes in animal behavior. The river often revealed clues to those willing to notice them. Farther away, scribes were beginning their work. Unlike farmers and fishermen, many scribes spent much of their day indoors or beneath shaded areas. Still, their labor required endurance of a different kind. Writing demanded concentration. Records needed accuracy. Mistakes created problems. Inside administrative buildings, temple complexes, and workshops, scribes carefully documented information. Harvest estimates. Supplies. Deliveries. Taxes. Labor assignments. Their brushes moved across writing surfaces with practiced precision. The room remained quiet except for the occasional scratch of writing and the soft voices of workers discussing their tasks. Many young boys dreamed of becoming scribes. The work offered shelter from the harshest physical labor. Yet the path was not easy. Education required discipline. Long hours of learning. Endless practice. Careful attention to detail. A student might spend years copying symbols repeatedly until his hand learned the proper movements. Even then, mastery came slowly. Outside, the sun climbed higher. By late morning, heat spread across the countryside. The cool comfort of dawn disappeared. Stone walls warmed. Dusty roads shimmered. The air itself seemed heavier. Workers adjusted naturally. Some sought shade when possible. Others wrapped cloth around their heads. Water became increasingly important. Throughout ancient Egypt, people understood the danger of dehydration even if they described it differently than people today. A laborer working beneath the sun learned quickly to respect the limits of his body. Still, necessity often demanded persistence. Fields would not wait. Canals would not repair themselves. Animals still needed care. The season continued regardless of exhaustion. In one village, a baker worked beside a clay oven. The heat surrounding him was intense. Even during cooler months, the oven produced waves of warmth. Bread dough waited nearby. Flour dust covered parts of the workspace. The smell of baking grain drifted into the street. Neighbors passing by recognized the scent immediately. Bread was deeply woven into daily life. People ate it regularly. Workers carried it with them. Families shared it during meals. Children grew up surrounded by its familiar aroma. Producing enough bread for a household required effort. Grain had to be grown, harvested, stored, ground into flour, mixed, shaped, baked. Each loaf represented many hours of labor long before it reached the table. As midday arrived, activity slowed slightly. The heat encouraged caution. Even animals appeared less energetic. Dogs searched for shade. Birds rested. Goats gathered near walls where narrow strips of shadow remained. The landscape itself seemed to pause. Inside homes, families escaped the brightest sunlight. Mudbrick construction helped. The thick walls offered some protection from the relentless heat outside. Rooms remained dim. Air moved slowly through openings designed to encourage ventilation. People rested when possible. A short period of relief could make the remainder of the day more manageable. An elderly man sat quietly near a doorway. He listened to distant sounds drifting through the village. Children talking. A cart moving over uneven ground. Someone calling to a neighbor. The noises blended together into a familiar background. He had lived through many seasons. Many floods. Many harvests. The patterns felt permanent. The Nile rose. The Nile fell. Seeds were planted. Crops were harvested. Families grew. Children became adults. The cycle continued. As afternoon slowly stretched across the land, work resumed with renewed determination. The angle of sunlight began to soften. Shadows lengthened little by little. People returned to tasks that had been postponed during the hottest hours. A merchant prepared goods for transport. Bundles were inspected carefully. Containers were secured. Trade connected villages across Egypt. Boat traffic carried products between distant communities. Grain, fish, pottery, textiles, tools. The movement of goods helped support daily life far beyond any single village. Merchants spent long periods traveling. The river often became their road. Journeys unfolded at a steady pace. Day after day. Village after village. Riverbank after riverbank. They observed changing landscapes and changing weather while remaining connected to the constant presence of the Nile. As evening approached, relief finally arrived. The heat gradually loosened its grip. A breeze traveled across the water. People noticed immediately. Conversations became more relaxed. Movements felt less strained. Workers returning home walked with tired but steady steps. The village changed once again. Cooking fires appeared. Smoke rose gently into the fading light. Families gathered near doorways and rooftops. The sky shifted through shades of gold, orange, and deepening blue. For many people, evening was the most pleasant part of the day. Labor had ended. The worst heat had passed. There was time to sit quietly. Time to eat. Time to share stories. A mother divided food among family members. A father discussed the condition of the crops. Children listened while occasionally becoming distracted by their own thoughts and observations. Simple conversations filled the evening air. Nothing extraordinary. Just the ordinary details of life. Yet these moments mattered. They created a sense of continuity. A feeling of belonging. A connection between generations. As darkness settled across the village, lamps glowed inside homes. Their light flickered softly against mud brick walls. Outside, stars emerged one by one. The desert sky revealed itself once more. Clear. Vast. Silent. People often slept relatively early. Without artificial light, daily schedules remained closely tied to the natural rhythm of sunrise and sunset. Rest was valuable. Tomorrow's work demanded energy. Inside one modest home, a family prepared for sleep. The evening meal had ended. The cooking area had been tidied. Children settled onto woven mats. Adults stretched tired muscles. The day lingered in their bodies. Sore hands. Aching backs. Dusty feet. Signs of honest labor. A gentle breeze entered through an opening in the wall. Someone sighed quietly. The room became still. Outside, distant sounds gradually faded. The village drifted toward silence. Only occasional noises remained. The call of a night bird. The movement of an animal. The whisper of wind against the walls. The Nile continued flowing nearby, unseen in the darkness but always present. Its waters moved steadily through the night just as they had for countless generations. And while families slept, the growing season continued its quiet work. Roots stretched deeper into moist soil. Plants gathered strength. Fields slowly transformed. Day by day. Week by week. The crops matured beneath the watchful eyes of farmers who depended upon them. As the season advanced, green fields spread wider across the countryside. The promise of harvest moved closer. People began watching the crops more carefully. They judged height, color, density. Every sign mattered. A successful harvest could provide comfort and security. A poor harvest created hardship. The stakes were understood by everyone. Yet even during periods of uncertainty, life continued according to familiar routines. Morning followed night. Work followed rest. The river flowed onward. And beneath the broad Egyptian sky, ordinary people carried on with patience, endurance, and quiet determination, surviving each season one day at a time. As the days passed, the fields grew thicker with life. What had once been dark stretches of wet earth were now covered with waving grain. When the wind moved across the countryside, the plants shifted together in slow ripples. From a distance, the field seemed almost like another river flowing beside the Nile. Farmers noticed every change. They had spent months watching these crops. They knew which areas had grown well. They knew where water had reached most evenly. They remembered the places where seedlings had struggled. Now, as harvest season slowly approached, they visited the fields with increasing care. The air felt different during this time of year. The flood was a memory. The planting was finished. The waiting was nearly over. Soon, many weeks of effort would finally reveal their results. Before sunrise one morning, a farmer stepped outside his home and paused for a moment. The village was still mostly asleep. Only a few lamps glowed through narrow doorways. The stars remained visible overhead. A cool breeze drifted from the river. For a brief time, the world felt peaceful and quiet. He listened to the distant sound of water moving through reeds. Then he began walking toward the fields. His sandals pressed softly against the dusty ground. The journey was familiar. He had traveled this path hundreds of times before. Every bend in the road was known to him. Every tree. Every canal. Every cluster of homes. As dawn slowly brightened the horizon, other workers appeared. Some carried tools across their shoulders. Others guided donkeys loaded with baskets. A few exchanged quiet greetings. Most saved their energy for the long day ahead. Harvest season was one of the busiest periods of the entire year. Work began early. It often continued until evening. Every available hand could be useful. Men worked in the fields. Women assisted with processing and storage. Children helped wherever they could. Entire households became part of the effort. The grain had to be gathered before damage occurred. Delays could create problems. Strong winds might scatter valuable crops. Birds could consume portions of the harvest. Unexpected weather sometimes created difficulties. Timing mattered. So the work began. The first rays of sunlight spread across the fields. Workers moved into position. Simple tools flashed briefly in the morning light. The sound of cutting soon filled the air. Steady. Repetitive. Almost rhythmic. Hour after hour, people worked beneath the widening sky. The labor demanded strength. Workers bent repeatedly. They lifted heavy bundles. They carried loads across uneven ground. Dust rose around their feet. Sweat appeared on their faces. Yet they continued. Many had performed the same tasks every year of their lives. The motions felt familiar. Even exhaustion had become familiar. Nearby, birds gathered at the edges of the fields. Some searched for fallen grain. Others watched from low branches. The countryside remained alive with movement. Nature and human labor existed side by side. As morning progressed, the sun climbed steadily upward. Heat spread across the land. Shadows shortened. The cool comfort of dawn disappeared. Workers wiped their brows and continued. The harvest could not wait. Water carriers moved through the fields when possible. A drink offered brief relief. Conversations remained short. Energy was precious. By midday, the heat became difficult. The air seemed to shimmer above the ground. Stone surfaces felt hot to the touch. Even the breeze offered little comfort. Many workers paused briefly when opportunities appeared. Some sat beneath small patches of shade. Others rested near storage areas. Meals were simple. Bread, vegetables, Perhaps fish from the river. Food provided necessary strength rather than luxury. After resting, people returned to work. The afternoon stretched ahead. The fields still waited. Throughout ancient Egypt, harvest season brought both satisfaction and worry. A good harvest meant security. Food stores could be filled. Families could prepare for future months. Trade opportunities increased. Communities felt more stable. Yet no harvest was guaranteed until the grain had been safely gathered and stored. That understanding remained in the minds of farmers throughout the season. Near one village, workers carried bundles toward a threshing area. Animals assisted with portions of the process. Dust floated through the warm air. Voices echoed softly across the open ground. The work required coordination. Everyone understood their role. Years of experience guided the routine. Nearby, scribes carefully recorded information. Quantities mattered. Supplies mattered. Storage mattered. The harvest represented survival for many communities. Accurate records helped ensure proper distribution and planning. A young scribe sat beneath a shaded structure. His writing tools rested beside him. Patiently, he documented measurements and deliveries. His hands remained cleaner than those of the field workers. Yet his responsibilities carried their own pressures. Mistakes could create confusion later. Accuracy required constant attention. As afternoon slowly softened into evening, signs of progress became visible everywhere. Storage containers filled. Work areas became crowded with harvested grain. People exchanged tired smiles. The results of many months were finally appearing. Across the countryside, similar scenes unfolded. Village after village. Field after field. The season touched nearly everyone. When the day's work finally ended, workers returned home with heavy limbs. Their muscles ached. Their shoulders felt sore. Dust covered their clothing. But there was also a quiet sense of accomplishment. The harvest was moving forward. That knowledge brought comfort. Back in the village, evening settled gently across the landscape. Cooking fires appeared once again. The familiar smell of bread drifted through the streets. Children played near doorways. Goats wandered through narrow passages. Neighbors shared observations about the day's progress. The atmosphere felt slightly different from other times of year. Busy. Tired. Yet hopeful. Above the village, the sky darkened. The first stars emerged. A warm wind moved through the streets. Families gathered for the evening meal. Inside one modest home, several generations sat together. An elderly grandmother listened while younger family members described the day's work. She nodded occasionally. Many decades earlier, she had participated in similar harvests herself. The details changed little. The tools might differ slightly. The workers might be different. But the rhythm remained familiar. Egypt's seasons continued their endless cycle. The Nile continued its journey. And people adapted year after year. Later that evening, after the meal had ended, the family moved to the roof. Many homes featured flat roofs that became pleasant gathering places during cooler hours. The air felt comfortable now. Far more comfortable than it had during the afternoon. People sat quietly. Some talked. Others simply watched the stars. The night sky over ancient Egypt could be remarkably clear. Without bright artificial lights, countless stars filled the darkness. Children often listened to stories beneath those stars. Not stories of great battles. Not stories of distant adventures. But simple stories. Family stories. Village stories. Memories carried forward from older generations. The sounds of the village gradually softened. One household after another prepared for sleep. Lamps were extinguished. Doors closed. Conversations faded. Silence slowly returned. Only the distant murmur of the river remained. The Nile never truly slept. Even at night, water continued moving through the darkness. Its steady presence comforted many people. The river brought food. The river brought transportation. The river brought fertile soil. The river shaped nearly every aspect of life. In many ways, surviving the seasons meant understanding the river. Knowing when it would rise. Knowing when it would retreat. Knowing how to work with its rhythms rather than against them. Generations spent their lives learning these lessons. A child watched his parents. Later he became a parent himself. Knowledge traveled quietly through time. Not through books alone. Not through official records alone. But through observation. Conversation. Experience. One person teaching another. As harvest season continued, grain stores gradually filled. This was important because another challenge always waited ahead. The dry months. Egypt was blessed by the Nile, but much of the surrounding land remained harsh and unforgiving. Beyond the green ribbon of fertile fields stretched vast desert landscapes. Sand. Rock. Heat. Distance. People living beside the river understood this reality deeply. The fertile land was precious because it was limited. Careless waste could create serious problems. Food had to be managed carefully. Storage areas needed protection. Containers required maintenance. Pests had to be controlled whenever possible. Preparation was a constant part of survival. Even after the harvest ended, work continued. There were tools to repair. Buildings to maintain. Canals to inspect. Animals to care for. Ancient life rarely offered long periods of complete rest. The seasons changed, but responsibility remained. One evening near the end of harvest, a fisherman sat beside the river after returning home. The water reflected the fading colors of sunset. Nearby reeds swayed gently. A few birds settled for the night. He watched the river quietly. The day's work was finished. For now. Tomorrow would bring new tasks. Different tasks perhaps. But still necessary. The fisherman had spent much of his life beside these waters. He understood their moods. Their seasons. Their gifts. And their dangers. The Nile could be generous. Yet it demanded respect. That understanding was shared across Egypt. Farmers understood it. Merchants understood it. Builders understood it. Children learned it early. The river shaped every season. And every season shaped the people. Night settled once more across the countryside. Stars reflected on calm water. Villages grew quiet. Families rested behind mud-brick walls. The heat of the day slowly faded into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a small boat moved silently along the river beneath the moonlight. Its gentle wake spread outward across the water before disappearing again. And while most of Egypt slept, the great cycle continued. The river flowed onward. The fields rested. The desert winds drifted softly through the night. And another season waited patiently beyond the horizon, ready to bring its own routines, challenges, and quiet rhythms to the lives of those who called the Nile home. The season slowly turned. No great announcement marked the change. No trumpet sounded across the river. No messenger traveled from village to village carrying news. Instead, the change arrived the way most changes arrived in ancient Egypt. Quietly. Gradually. Almost unnoticed at first. The mornings felt slightly different. The air carried a new quality. The fields no longer looked quite the same. Storage areas stood fuller than before. The busiest days of harvest had passed. Yet life remained busy. There was always something that required attention. Before dawn one morning, the village rested beneath a blanket of stars. The river moved silently through the darkness. Palm trees stood motionless against the night sky. A few lamps glowed faintly inside distant homes. Most people were still asleep. Inside one mudbrick house, a family rested together on woven mats. The room was simple. The walls were smooth but uneven in places. A clay jar stood near the doorway. A basket rested in the corner. The faint smell of grain lingered in the air. The previous day's heat had finally faded. For these few hours before sunrise, the world felt cool, comfortable, peaceful. A young boy stirred first. He opened his eyes and listened. Nothing moved. Only the faint sound of insects outside. Only the distant whisper of the Nile. For a moment he remained still. Then he closed his eyes again. Sleep returned easily. Ancient Egyptian life often followed the rhythms of light and darkness. Without bright lamps illuminating entire homes, night encouraged rest. People woke with the sun. They worked through the day. And they sought sleep when darkness returned. Their bodies learned the pattern. Generation after generation. The cycle became part of life itself. As dawn approached, the eastern horizon slowly brightened. Birds began calling from the reeds. A rooster crowed somewhere nearby. Doors opened. People emerged from their homes. Another day had begun. Women prepared food. Men gathered tools. Children helped with simple tasks. The village gradually filled with movement. The smell of baking bread spread through narrow streets. Freshly ground grain waited in bowls. Small cooking fires flickered in the cool morning air. For many families, these quiet hours before the heat arrived were among the most productive. Tasks seemed easier. The body moved more comfortably. The mind felt clearer. A farmer carried a basket toward a storage building. Inside, harvested grain waited in carefully organized containers. Protecting these supplies was essential. Months of labor rested inside those walls. Every basket represented days spent beneath the sun. Every container represented future meals. Food security depended upon careful planning. The people of ancient Egypt understood this deeply. Abundance could not be taken for granted. Good years provided comfort. Difficult years required resilience. And so communities learned to prepare. Throughout the countryside, workers inspected storage areas regularly. They checked for moisture. They checked for insects. They checked for damage. Even a small problem could grow larger if ignored. Attention to detail helped families survive. Many of the skills required for survival were not dramatic. They were quiet skills. Patient skills. The ability to notice small changes. The ability to plan ahead. The ability to maintain tools, homes, and supplies before problems became serious. Such knowledge passed naturally through daily life. A child watched an elder repair a basket. A young worker observed how grain was stored. A daughter learned how bread dough should feel beneath her hands. These lessons rarely occurred in formal settings. They unfolded during ordinary moments. One task at a time. One season after another. As the sun rose higher, Activity increased throughout the village. A potter sat beside his work area. The clay beneath his hands felt cool. Patiently, he shaped a vessel that would eventually store water, grain, oil, or other valuable supplies. The work required concentration. Too much pressure could ruin the shape. Too little attention could create weaknesses. Years of practice guided every movement. Nearby, finished pots rested in neat rows. Some were large. Some were small. Each served a purpose. In ancient Egypt, simple objects often carried great importance. A well-made jar could help preserve food. A strong basket could carry supplies safely. A carefully crafted tool could save countless hours of labor. The ordinary objects of daily life supported survival in countless ways. Farther along the river, fishermen prepared their boats. The morning water looked smooth beneath the rising sun. Light danced across the surface. Birds schemed low over the reeds. The fishermen checked their nets carefully. A torn section could mean lost catches. Repairs were completed before departure. Preparation always mattered. Then, with quiet movements, boats pushed away from shore. The river welcomed them. Wood creaked softly. Oars dipped into the water. The shoreline slowly drifted behind. Out on the Nile, the world felt different. The air often remained cooler. The breeze moved more freely. The sounds of the village faded. Only the water remained close. Many fishermen spent long hours observing the river. They noticed shifting currents, changes in water color, the movements of birds, the behavior of fish. Experience taught them where to look. Experience taught them patience. Patience was one of the most valuable skills in ancient Egypt. Nature could not be rushed. Crops grew at their own pace. Floodwaters rose according to distant rains. Fish followed their own patterns. The seasons unfolded gradually. People learned to move within those rhythms rather than fight against them. By midday, heat once again settled across the land. The desert sun shone brightly overhead. Dusty roads appeared almost white beneath its glare. The air became still. Even simple tasks required greater effort. Workers sought shade whenever possible. Under trees. Beside walls. Beneath woven shelters. Every small patch of shadow became valuable. Inside homes, families adjusted naturally. Thick mud brick walls helped reduce the heat. Rooms remained darker than the outside world. Clay jars stored water. People moved more slowly. The pace of life softened during the hottest hours. An elderly woman sat near a doorway weaving reeds into a basket. Her hands moved steadily. She had repeated these motions for decades. The work felt natural, comfortable, almost meditative. Outside, children played briefly before retreating into the shade. Their laughter drifted through the air, then faded again. The village entered its midday quiet. For a little while, the world seemed to rest. Yet even during these slower hours, life continued. Animals required care. Food required preparation. Repairs continued. Every household contained responsibilities. A mother needed dough. A father sharpened a tool. A young apprentice practiced writing symbols under the watchful eye of his teacher. The details differed. The rhythm remained familiar. As afternoon slowly unfolded, the heat gradually eased. A breeze arrived from the river. People noticed immediately. Movement increased once more. Doors opened. Workers returned to outdoor tasks. Voices became more common in the streets. The village awakened from its midday stillness. Along a dusty road, merchants guided donkeys loaded with goods. Their journey had begun far away. Travel in ancient Egypt often required patience. Roads could be rough. Distances could be long. Heat could be exhausting. Yet trade remained essential. Communities depended upon goods arriving from elsewhere. Stone, wood, textiles, tools, oils. Countless items moved through the country over time. The Nile helped make these journeys possible. Much transportation occurred by boat. The river connected people across great distances. A merchant might spend days traveling between settlements. He would sleep near the river, wake before sunrise, continue onward, village after village, season after season. The river served as both guide and companion. As evening approached, golden light spread across the landscape. The harsh brightness of midday disappeared. Fields glowed softly beneath the lowering sun. Palm trees cast long shadows. The river reflected warm colors. Workers began returning home. Some carried fish. Others carried tools. Others carried nothing except fatigue. Their bodies felt heavy after a long day. Their feet ached. Their shoulders were sore. Yet there was comfort in returning home. Cooking fires appeared. Smoke drifted upward. Families gathered once more. The familiar rituals of evening began. Food was prepared. Water was shared. Conversations unfolded naturally. The village seemed to exhale. Night approached. The hardest work was finished. For now. A young builder sat outside his home eating bread while watching the sunset. He listened to distant voices. To animals settling for the evening. To the quiet sounds of village life. The sky slowly darkened. One star appeared. Then another. Then many more. The same stars that had watched over countless generations before him. The same stars that would remain long after his own lifetime ended. Such thoughts were not unusual in ancient Egypt. People lived close to nature. Close to the sky. Close to the river. The movements of the natural world surrounded them constantly. They noticed these things. They lived within them. As darkness deepened, the village became quiet again. Lamps flickered behind walls. Families prepared for sleep. The Nile continued its endless journey through the night. Beyond the river, the desert stretched silently beneath the moonlight. And somewhere far to the south, beyond the horizon, waters were already beginning their long journey toward Egypt. The next flood remained distant. Yet it was coming. As it always had. As it always would. And the people who lived beside the Nile would once again prepare themselves for another turning of the seasons, another year of work, another cycle of survival beneath the calm and watchful stars. The nights beside the Nile often felt larger than the days. After sunset, when the heat finally released its hold on the land, a different Egypt emerged. The fields became quiet. The roads emptied. The workshops closed. Even the animals seemed calmer. A cool breeze sometimes drifted across the river and through the villages, carrying the scent of water, reeds, damp earth, and distant cooking fires that had only recently faded. For many families, these hours brought their greatest comfort. The hard labor of the day was finished. Tools rested against walls. Baskets sat where they had been placed. Fishing nets dried quietly in the darkness. The demands of survival never disappeared completely, but for a little while they felt farther away. A man lay awake on a flat rooftop. His family slept nearby. Above him stretched a sky filled with stars. Thousands of tiny lights shone over the river valley. The desert beyond the cultivated land disappeared into darkness, but the stars remained. They seemed endless, steady, unchanging. Generations of Egyptians had looked upward at the same night sky. Farmers, builders, fishermen, servants, scribes, merchants, children who would grow old, old people who remembered childhood. All had rested beneath these same stars. The night breeze moved gently across the rooftop. Somewhere nearby, reeds whispered along the riverbank. The sound was soft enough to blend with sleep. Eventually his eyes closed. The village settled into silence. And while people rested, the river continued flowing through the darkness. Long before sunrise, movement began again. The first workers often woke while stars still remained overhead. Their bodies had learned the rhythm of the seasons. The rhythm of labor. The rhythm of necessity. A woman rose from her sleeping mat and moved quietly through the dim interior of her home. The floor felt cool beneath her feet. The air still carried traces of night. She lit a small lamp. Its warm glow illuminated clay jars, baskets, and simple household tools. Soon she began grinding grain. The familiar sound echoed softly through the room. Stone against stone. Back and forth. Steady. Patient. The work required strength. Hour after hour. Day after day. Year after year. Many women spent enormous portions of their lives preparing food. The labor was often repetitive. Yet it remained essential. Without bread, there could be no household. Without grain, there could be no security. Without preparation, survival became uncertain. Outside, dawn slowly approached. The eastern horizon brightened. Birds awakened among the reeds. A fisherman prepared his boat. A farmer gathered tools. A potter inspected clay that had been covered overnight. The village came alive one household at a time. The season continued its slow movement toward the next flood. The river itself appeared calm. Yet experienced farmers watched carefully. They knew that changes often began subtly. The Nile rarely transformed overnight. Water levels shifted gradually. Observant people noticed small differences first. A mark on a riverbank. A change in current. An increase in moisture along the edge of a canal. These clues mattered. For thousands of years, Egyptians had watched the river with extraordinary attention. The Nile shaped nearly everything. The success of crops. The health of animals. The movement of trade. The availability of food. The future of entire communities. Knowledge of the river became one of the most valuable forms of wisdom a person could possess. Older farmers often carried decades of experience. They remembered years when floodwaters arrived slightly earlier. Years when they rose higher. Years when conditions differed. Their memories became part of the village's collective knowledge. A younger worker might ask questions while repairing a canal. An elder might answer while leaning on a wooden tool. The lesson would not feel formal. It would emerge naturally during work. One generation teaching another. One season connected to the next. As the morning progressed, activity spread across the countryside. Along irrigation channels, workers inspected embankments. The structures required regular attention. Small cracks could grow larger. Weak sections could fail. Repairs completed early often prevented larger problems later. Much of survival in ancient Egypt depended upon maintenance. maintaining fields, maintaining homes, maintaining storage areas, maintaining boats, maintaining tools. People invested countless hours in preserving the things they already possessed. Resources were valuable. Nothing useful was wasted carelessly. Near a workshop, a carpenter sat cross-legged while shaping wood. The smell of freshly cut timber filled the air. Good wood was precious in Egypt. Large forests were rare. Many materials traveled great distances before reaching craftsmen. The carpenter worked carefully. Each cut mattered. Each measurement mattered. Mistakes could not always be corrected easily. Nearby, apprentices watched. Their eyes followed every movement. They listened more than they spoke. Learning often happened through observation. Skills developed slowly. Months became years. Years became mastery. Across the village, similar scenes unfolded. Potters shaped vessels. Weavers worked with fibers. Stoneworkers repaired damaged surfaces. Every craft contributed something important to daily life. Together they supported the larger system that allowed communities to survive. The morning sun continued climbing higher. Heat gradually spread across the land. The cool comfort of dawn became a memory. Workers adjusted naturally. Some wrapped cloth around their heads. Others paused briefly for water. Nobody needed to be reminded that the sun demanded respect. Life beside the Nile offered many gifts. But comfort was not always one of them. During the hottest periods, simply existing required effort. The body worked constantly to endure the heat. Sweat appeared quickly. Energy faded faster. Shadows became treasured. A narrow strip of shade beside a wall could feel remarkably valuable. By midday, many villages entered a quieter period. Movement slowed. Voices softened. People sought shelter from the strongest sunlight. Inside homes, families occupied the coolest areas they could find. The thick mud brick walls performed their quiet task. They blocked some of the heat. They created shelter. They transformed simple structures into places of relief. A child sat beside his grandmother while she repaired a woven mat. The room remained dim. Outside, bright sunlight filled the streets. Inside, the atmosphere felt calm. Dust particles drifted through narrow beams of light. The grandmother's hands moved steadily. The child watched. Questions occasionally interrupted the silence. Answers came patiently. Many lessons passed between generations in moments like these. Not through formal instruction. Not through written records. But through shared time. Shared work. Shared experience. As afternoon arrived, a breeze rose from the river. The change was subtle. Yet people noticed immediately. Doors opened. Workers returned outdoors. The village became active once again. Near the riverbank, fishermen unloaded part of their catch. Fish glistened briefly in the sunlight. The smell of water and reeds mixed with the smell of fresh fish. Nearby, merchants discussed supplies. Farmers exchanged observations. Children chased one another through narrow pathways. Life continued moving forward. Steady. Predictable. Comforting in its routine. Further south along the river, larger settlements bustled with activity. Boats arrived carrying grain. Officials inspected shipments. Laborers unloaded cargo. Markets filled with conversation. Yet even in these busier places, life remained closely connected to the seasons. The river touched everything. Its influence reached every workshop, every kitchen, every storage room, every field. The Nile existed at the center of daily life. As the sun began descending toward the western horizon, long shadows returned. The light softened. The heat eased. Workers felt relief spreading through their tired bodies. Another day was nearing its end. A farmer walked slowly home. His sandals were coated with dust. His hands showed signs of years spent working outdoors. His back ached. His shoulders felt heavy. Yet these sensations were familiar companions. The land had given him work. The river had given him water. The season had given him purpose. Tomorrow he would return to the fields. Just as he had yesterday. Just as he likely would for many years to come. When evening finally arrived, the village settled into its familiar pattern. Cooking fires flickered. Smoke drifted upward. The smell of baking bread filled the air. Families gathered together. Meals were shared. Stories were exchanged. Not every conversation concerned important matters. Many focused on simple observations. A damaged basket. A healthy crop. A stubborn donkey. A neighbor's new child. The ordinary details of life formed the fabric of community. These small moments connected people to one another. They created stability. A sense of belonging. A feeling that tomorrow would arrive much like today. As darkness deepened, lamps glowed softly inside homes. Outside, the stars appeared once more. The river reflected fragments of moonlight. Palm trees stood quietly along the shore. The countryside seemed peaceful. Almost timeless. Yet beneath this calm surface, the great cycle continued turning. Far to the south, waters moved toward Egypt. Slowly. Patiently. The next flood was drawing closer. Most people did not think about it every moment. There was too much daily work to occupy their attention. But somewhere in the back of their minds remained an awareness. The river would rise again. The fields would disappear beneath water. The soil would be renewed. The seasons would begin another journey. And the people of ancient Egypt, as their ancestors had done for countless generations, would once again adjust their lives to the rhythm of the Nile, finding ways to endure heat, labor, uncertainty, and time itself beneath the quiet stars of the ancient world. The Nile flowed through every season like a patient companion. It was there in the cool blue light before dawn. It was there beneath the fierce brightness of midday. It was there when evening painted the sky with fading gold. And it remained there through the deepest hours of the night, moving quietly beneath the stars. For the people of ancient Egypt, the river was never far away. Even those who could not see it could often sense its presence. The smell of damp reeds drifted on the wind. The calls of water birds echoed across the fields. The distant splash of oars sometimes carried through the darkness. The Nile shaped daily life so completely that many routines seemed to flow from it naturally. One morning, long before sunrise, a fisherman awoke to the sound of a gentle breeze brushing against the walls of his home. The village remained asleep. The air felt cool. For a few moments he listened to the silence. Then he sat up and prepared for the day. His movements were slow and practiced. Nothing was hurried. His fishing nets had been repaired the evening before. His boat was ready. Only the river awaited him now. Outside, the stars still covered the sky. The path to the riverbank was familiar beneath his feet. He had walked it thousands of times. As he approached the shore, he could hear the soft movement of water against mud and reeds. The sound was comforting. Steady. Reliable. The river had provided for his family throughout his life. His father had fished these waters. His grandfather had done the same. The knowledge of where to cast a net and when to wait had traveled through generations like a quiet inheritance. Nearby, another boat rested in the darkness. Its owner would soon arrive. Before long, several fishermen pushed their vessels into the water. The boats drifted gently away from shore. The village lights faded behind them. Ahead lay the broad river, still hidden beneath the final shadows of night. As dawn approached, a pale glow appeared in the east. The water slowly changed color. Dark blue became silver. Silver became gold. The day began again. Along the riverbanks, farmers were already waking. The cooler months before the next flood often brought a different kind of work. The harvest was complete. The grain was stored. But the land still required care. Canals had to be maintained. Fields needed preparation. Boundaries between plots required attention. The work never truly ended. It simply changed shape. A farmer walked beside an irrigation channel carrying a wooden tool over his shoulder. The earth beneath his sandals felt firm and dry. Birds moved through the nearby reeds. The sky brightened steadily overhead. As he examined the canal, he looked for signs of wear. Small collapses. Cracks. Areas where water might not flow correctly when needed. Repairing such problems now could prevent larger difficulties later. Patience was one of the great strengths of ancient Egyptian life. People learned to think ahead. A repaired canal might not seem important today. But months later it could make all the difference. The same principle applied to many parts of life. A repaired roof. A reinforced storage jar. A sharpened tool. Small efforts often protected future comfort. Throughout the villages, similar tasks occupied the morning hours. A woman inspected baskets used for carrying grain. Several showed signs of wear. She sat beneath a shaded area and began repairing them. Her fingers moved carefully through the woven fibers. The work required attention but not great speed. The basket would be ready when it was ready. Nearby, a young girl watched. Occasionally she helped. Occasionally she asked questions. Most often she simply observed. One day these skills would belong to her as well. Knowledge moved quietly through everyday life. No special ceremony marked its passing. Children learned because they were present. Because they watched. Because they listened. As the sun rose higher, workshops became busy. The sounds of labor spread through the settlement. The tapping of stone tools. The scraping of wood. The soft thump of clay being shaped. Each sound blended into the familiar music of daily work. A potter sat at his station, preparing vessels that would eventually store food, water, oils, and other necessities. The clay felt cool beneath his hands. He worked steadily. His movements were smooth from years of repetition. The shape of a jar emerged slowly. A little pressure here. A slight adjustment there. Patience transformed raw clay into something useful. Across Egypt, countless craftspeople spent their lives creating the objects that supported ordinary existence. Most would never become famous. Their names would not be recorded on monuments. Yet their work mattered deeply. A family needed jars. A farmer needed tools. A fisherman needed nets. A merchant needed containers. Everyday life depended upon the skills of ordinary people. By late morning, the heat began to build. Even during seasons that were considered milder, the Egyptian sun remained powerful. The landscape brightened beneath its light. Dusty roads reflected the glare. Stone walls warmed quickly. People adjusted their pace. Water became more important. Shade became more valuable. Workers understood these realities from experience. Many paused briefly to drink. Others shifted tasks when possible. Heavy labor often began early for a reason. The coolest hours were precious. A group of builders worked on repairs to a mudbrick structure near the edge of a village. The building had suffered minor damage during previous months. Now the walls required attention. Fresh mud was mixed. Bricks were inspected. Sections were reinforced. The work seemed simple. Yet these repairs protected families from weather, heat, and time. Mudbrick homes were practical structures. Their thick walls offered shelter from the sun. Their materials were readily available. Communities understood how to build them. Generation after generation, similar homes appeared beside the Nile. Inside one such house, a grandmother prepared food while several children sat nearby. The smell of baking bread drifted through the room. The familiar scent brought comfort. Bread accompanied nearly every aspect of life. Workers carried it into the fields. Fishermen carried it onto boats. Families shared it during evening meals. Producing it required many stages. Growing grain. Harvesting grain. Grinding grain. Mixing dough. Baking loaves. Every piece represented a chain of labor stretching across seasons. As midday arrived, much of the village grew quieter. People sought relief from the strongest heat. Animals rested in shaded areas. Dogs stretched out beside walls. Goats gathered beneath simple shelters. Bird activity decreased. The landscape itself seemed to slow down. A young scribe sat in a shaded room reviewing records. Outside, bright sunlight flooded the village. Inside, the atmosphere remained calm. The room smelled faintly of papyrus and ink. Stacks of documents rested nearby. His work required concentration. Numbers. Deliveries. Storage records. Measurements. The details mattered. Administrative work may have appeared less physically demanding than farming, but it brought its own challenges. Hours of careful attention could be exhausting in a different way. The scribe rubbed his eyes briefly before continuing. Outside, the afternoon stretched onward. Eventually the heat began to soften. The first signs were subtle. A small breeze. Longer shadows. A slight cooling of the air. People noticed immediately. Doors opened. Activity resumed. The village awakened from its midday quiet. Along the riverbank, merchants loaded goods onto boats. The vessels sat low in the water beneath the weight of their cargo. Grain. Pottery. Textiles. Tools. The river connected distant communities. A journey that might take many days by land could often be managed more efficiently by water. Boat crews prepared carefully. Ropes were checked. Cargo was secured. Supplies were inspected. Then, when everything was ready, the boats began moving downstream. Their reflections shimmered across the river's surface. As evening approached, the countryside glowed beneath warm sunlight. The harsh edges of the day softened. Workers slowly returned home. Dust clung to clothing. Muscles ached. Hands showed signs of labor. Yet there was satisfaction in familiar routines. People understood their place within the cycle of the seasons. They knew what needed to be done. And they did it. One task at a time. One day at a time. 1 year at a time. Near sunset, a farmer paused beside his field. The light stretched long across the landscape. The river reflected the sky. palm trees stood motionless in the still air. For a few moments he simply looked around. The land appeared peaceful. The work of many months surrounded him. Canals, fields, storage buildings, homes. Everything represented effort. Everything represented cooperation. No single person could maintain the entire system alone. Communities survived because people worked together. Families depended upon one another. Neighbors helped neighbors. Knowledge passed between generations. The rhythm endured. Night arrived slowly. The western horizon darkened. The first stars appeared overhead. Cooking fires flickered throughout the village. Their smoke drifted upward into the cooling air. Families gathered for meals. Voices carried through narrow streets. Children listened to stories. Workers rested tired bodies. The day came gently to a close. Above them, the stars shone brightly once more. Below them, the Nile continued its endless journey. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, hidden from every eye in the village, the distant waters that would one day become the next great flood continued their slow movement northward, drawing the ancient world ever closer to another turning of the seasons. The turning of the seasons was rarely sudden. Most people did not wake one morning and announce that a new season had arrived. Instead, they noticed small signs. A change in the river. A shift in the wind. A different feeling in the morning air. The people of ancient Egypt lived so closely with the natural world that these small changes became part of their awareness. A farmer might notice them while walking to his field before sunrise. A fisherman might notice them while guiding his boat through calm water. A child might notice them while carrying a clay jar along a dusty path. The signs appeared quietly, and those who paid attention understood their meaning. One cool morning, before the sun had risen, a thin mist rested above parts of the Nile. The water moved beneath it almost silently. The village remained asleep except for a handful of early workers. The stars were beginning to fade. The eastern horizon showed the faintest hint of light. A woman stepped outside her home carrying an empty basket. The ground beneath her feet felt cool. She paused for a moment and looked toward the river. Everything seemed peaceful. The reeds stood motionless. The air felt fresh. The silence carried a certain comfort. Then she continued toward her morning tasks. Throughout Egypt, countless people were beginning similar routines. Some prepared food. Some repaired tools. Some gathered water. Others prepared to travel. The details varied, but the rhythm remained familiar. Life flowed according to patterns repeated across generations. Inside one small home, grain was being ground into flour. The steady scraping of stone filled the room. Nearby, dough was already being prepared. The smell of baking bread would soon spread into the street. For many households, mornings began this way. Long before the heat arrived. Long before the busiest hours of labor. Bread connected nearly every part of Egyptian life. It appeared at simple meals. It traveled with workers into the fields. It accompanied fishermen on the river. It sustained builders, merchants, and scribes alike. The process of making it required patience. Nothing happened quickly. The grain had to be planted. The grain had to grow. The grain had to be harvested. Stored. Ground. Mixed. Baked. Every loaf represented months of effort. As dawn brightened the sky, movement increased throughout the village. Doors opened. Voices appeared. Animals stirred. A donkey carrying baskets walked slowly down a narrow street. A child followed close behind. Nearby, An elderly man sat outside his home watching the morning unfold. His hair had long since turned gray. His hands showed decades of labor. The seasons had shaped his entire life. He had seen floods come and go. He had worked through years of abundance and years of difficulty. Experience had taught him patience. The Nile rarely rushed. The seasons rarely rushed. Life itself often moved slowly. The old man watched as younger workers headed toward the fields. He remembered doing the same. The feeling of cool morning air before a day of labor. The sound of sandals against packed earth. The quiet determination that accompanied ordinary work. Many things changed over a lifetime. Yet many things remained familiar. The river still flowed. The sun still rose. The seasons still turned. By mid-morning, the village had fully awakened. Craftsmen worked in open courtyards. Farmers inspected fields. Merchants organized supplies. Children carried messages and completed simple chores. The sounds of daily life blended together. A hammer striking wood. Voices exchanging greetings. The distant call of birds. The creak of a cartwheel. None of these sounds felt remarkable. Yet together they formed the soundtrack of ancient Egyptian life. Near the edge of the settlement, a group of workers inspected an irrigation canal. The structure had served the community for years. Now portions required maintenance. The men moved carefully along the banks. They examined cracks. They removed debris. They strengthened weakened sections. The work demanded attention rather than speed. Water was too important to leave anything to chance. An effective canal could support crops for an entire season. A damaged canal could create hardship. The workers understood this. Their effort today protected future harvests. Such thinking was common in Egypt. People often labored for rewards they would not see immediately. A repaired canal. A reinforced storage building. A newly woven basket. Preparation was woven deeply into survival. Farther down the river, fishermen watched the water carefully. The Nile revealed many things to those who spent enough time observing it. The color of the water. The movement of birds. The strength of the current. The appearance of reeds along the shore. All provided information. Knowledge came from attention. And attention came from experience. A fisherman who had spent decades on the river often noticed details that younger men missed. The river became a teacher. Patient. Quiet. Constant. As the sun climbed toward midday, the heat gradually returned. Shadows shrank. Dust rose from busy roads. Workers wiped sweat from their foreheads. Animals searched for shelter. The familiar challenge of the Egyptian climate appeared once again. Heat shaped daily schedules just as surely as the river shaped the land. People learned to respect it. Ignoring the heat could bring exhaustion. Working with it made life easier. Many demanding tasks were completed during morning hours for this reason. By midday, activity slowed. Inside homes, families sought cooler spaces. Mudbrick walls offered protection from the sun. The rooms remained dim and comfortable compared to the brightness outside. A grandmother sat weaving while a young child rested nearby. The afternoon felt peaceful. Outside, sunlight filled the village streets. Inside, time seemed slower. The grandmother's hands moved steadily through the fibers. Her motions were practiced. Natural. She did not need to think about each step. Years of experience guided her fingers. The child watched quietly. Learning often happened in this way. Not through formal lessons. Not through written instructions. simply through presence. Watching. Listening. Remembering. Across the village, similar moments unfolded. A father showed a son how to repair a tool handle. A mother taught a daughter how to prepare dough. An experienced fisherman explained river currents to an apprentice. Knowledge flowed through daily life as naturally as the Nile flowed through the countryside. When afternoon began to cool, people emerged once more. Work resumed. The village regained its energy. Along the riverbank, merchants loaded cargo for transport. Bundles of goods waited beneath simple shelters. Pottery. Textiles. Food supplies. Each item represented labor. Each item had traveled through many hands before reaching this point. Trade linked communities together. Villages depended upon one another. The Nile made those connections possible. A merchant preparing for a journey checked his supplies carefully. Travel required planning. The river could be generous. It could also be unpredictable. Food had to be packed. Water had to be carried. Equipment had to be inspected. A successful journey often depended on preparation completed long before departure. As evening approached, sunlight turned softer. The harsh brightness of midday disappeared. Golden light spread across fields and canals. The landscape seemed calmer. More peaceful. Workers slowly made their way home. The day's labor rested heavily in their muscles. Yet there was comfort in familiar exhaustion. The work had purpose. The work supported families. The work sustained communities. In one home, the evening meal was already being prepared. The smell of bread drifted into the street. Neighbors exchanged greetings while passing by. Children played nearby. A dog rested beside a doorway. The village settled into its evening rhythm. A rhythm repeated countless times before. A rhythm that would continue long after any single person was gone. As darkness arrived, lamps flickered behind walls. Stars appeared overhead. The Nile reflected faint bands of moonlight. The air felt cooler now. More comfortable. Families gathered together. Stories were shared. Observations from the day were exchanged. The conversations were simple. The condition of a field. The repair of a canal. The behavior of animals. The arrival of travelers. Ordinary topics. Yet these conversations helped bind communities together. The day slowly faded. One household after another prepared for sleep. The sounds of the village softened. Voices became fewer. Doors closed. Lamps dimmed. Soon only the quiet sounds of the night remained. The whisper of wind through reeds. The distant movement of water. The occasional call of a bird somewhere in the darkness. And beneath the stars, the Nile continued its endless journey northward, carrying with it the promise of future floods, future harvests, future seasons, and countless more ordinary days in the lives of the people who depended upon its gentle and ancient rhythm. The river remembered every season. Long before any farmer stepped into a field, long before any fishing net touched the water, the Nile was already moving through the landscape, carrying distant waters northward through the heart of Egypt. Its journey never stopped. Day and night. Summer and winter. Flood and drought. The river continued. And because it continued, life continued as well. In the quiet hours before dawn, when most of the world still slept, the Nile often seemed almost mysterious. Moonlight rested upon its surface. Shadows gathered among the reeds. The water reflected the stars overhead. At times, the boundary between river and sky felt difficult to see. A fisherman standing along the shore might feel as though he were standing between two worlds of darkness, one above and one below. The air felt cool. The breeze smelled of water and wet earth. Everything seemed calm. Nearby, a village remained asleep. Mud-brick homes stood quietly beneath the stars. Their flat roofs blended into the darkness. Animals rested in small enclosures. Cooking fires had long since faded into ash. Only a few faint sounds disturbed the silence. A distant bird. A rustling reed. The soft lap of water against the shore. Eventually, the eastern horizon began to brighten. A thin line of pale light appeared. Then another. The stars slowly retreated. The river changed color. Silver became blue. Blue became gold. Morning had arrived once again. Across Egypt, people began waking. A woman rose from her sleeping mat and stretched tired muscles. A builder prepared for another day of labor. A merchant checked supplies before a journey. A farmer stepped outside and studied the sky. Each person carried different responsibilities. Yet all shared the same cycle. Wake. Work. Rest. Sleep. Then begin again. The rhythm connected entire communities. It connected generations. It connected the living to those who had come before. Inside one home, bread was already being prepared. The grinding stones began their familiar song. Back and forth. Back and forth. The sound had existed in Egyptian households for thousands of years. Children often woke hearing it. Adults spent countless hours performing it. The work demanded effort. Grain had to be transformed into flour before bread could be made. There were no shortcuts. Only patience. Only repetition. Only skill developed through years of practice. As sunlight spread across the village, activity increased. Doors opened. Workers stepped into the streets. Animals were fed. Water jars were filled. The day unfolded naturally. No one needed instructions. Everyone understood what must be done. The tasks changed with the seasons, but responsibility remained constant. Near the edge of the settlement, a farmer walked toward a canal carrying a simple wooden tool. The canal had served the village for many years. Its banks needed occasional repair. The work was not exciting. No songs would be written about it. No monument would commemorate it. Yet the canal helped sustain crops that fed entire families. Small acts of maintenance often carried enormous importance. The farmer knew this. His father had known it. His grandfather had known it. The lesson had passed quietly from one generation to the next. Take care of the canal. Take care of the fields. Take care of the tools. Take care of the future. The morning air remained pleasant for a while. Birds moved among the reeds. The breeze carried moisture from the river. Workers took advantage of these comfortable hours. Heavy labor was easier before the heat arrived. Stoneworkers shaped blocks. Builders repaired walls. Farmers inspected fields. The countryside filled with steady movement. Nothing rushed. Nothing dramatic occurred. Just ordinary people completing ordinary tasks. And together those ordinary tasks sustained an entire civilization. Farther along the Nile, a small boat drifted away from shore. Several fishermen sat quietly inside. Their nets rested nearby. The river stretched before them. Wide. Calm. Endless. Fishing often required long periods of waiting. The fishermen understood this. They watched the water. They observed birds. They paid attention to currents. Hours could pass in relative silence. Patience was part of the craft. The river rewarded those willing to wait. One younger fisherman glanced toward an older companion. The older man had spent decades on these waters. His face showed signs of countless days beneath the sun. His hands were strong and weathered. He understood the Nile in ways difficult to explain. Knowledge gained through observation often resisted simple words. It lived in instinct, in habit, in experience. The younger fisherman hoped to learn. Not through lectures, not through written instructions, but through time spent together on the river. This was how many skills survived. One person watching another. One generation following the next. As morning became afternoon, heat spread across the landscape. The sun stood high above the river valley. Shadows grew short. Dust shimmered above roads. Workers slowed their pace when possible. The air felt heavy. Even simple tasks required more energy. A merchant traveling between villages wiped sweat from his forehead and adjusted the bundles carried by his donkey. The journey had already lasted several days. The road followed portions of the river. Occasionally he passed fields. Occasionally clusters of homes. Sometimes long stretches of open land separated one settlement from the next. Travel required endurance. Yet merchants accepted these challenges as part of life. Trade connected communities. Goods moved from one region to another. Ideas traveled as well. Stories traveled. News traveled. The river tied everything together. By midday, many households retreated into cooler spaces. Inside thick mud-brick homes, temperatures remained more comfortable. Light entered through narrow openings. Dust drifted through thin beams of sunlight. The atmosphere felt calm. Almost sleepy. An elderly woman rested while weaving reeds into a basket. The work moved slowly. There was no need to hurry. Her hands understood the pattern. The fibers crossed and folded. The shape gradually emerged. Nearby, a young girl watched carefully. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she simply observed. One day she would perform the same work. One day another child might watch her. Knowledge traveled through time in this quiet way. Not through grand ceremonies. Not through official announcements. Simply through shared experience. As afternoon continued, the heat eventually softened. The change arrived gradually. A breeze returned. The sunlight became less harsh. Long shadows appeared once more. People emerged from shaded areas. Work resumed. The village regained its familiar energy. Along the riverbank, children carried small water jars. Their footsteps kicked up dust. Nearby, fishermen returned with their catch. Voices echoed across the shoreline. Boats bumped gently against wooden posts. The smells of water, fish, mud, and reeds mingled together. Life beside the Nile engaged every sense. The sound of birds. The warmth of sunlight. The smell of baking bread. The feel of dust beneath sandals. The sight of green fields stretching beside the river. These experiences formed the background of daily existence. Most people rarely stopped to think about them. They were simply part of life. As evening approached, the entire landscape seemed to relax. The heat released its hold. The river reflected golden light. Palm trees cast long shadows across the ground. Workers headed home. Families gathered. Cooking fires appeared one by one. Smoke rose gently into the evening air. Inside homes, meals were prepared. Conversations began. Children spoke about their day. Adults exchanged observations about crops, repairs, trade, and weather. Simple topics. Ordinary topics. Yet these conversations strengthened the bonds between people. Community grew through countless small interactions. A shared meal. A shared task. A shared story. As darkness settled across the village, stars emerged overhead. One by one. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The night sky stretched endlessly above the river valley. The air felt pleasant now. Cool compared to the long afternoon. Many families spent time outdoors before sleep. Some sat on rooftops. Others gathered near doorways. The stars provided quiet companionship. A farmer looked upward while listening to distant sounds from the river. A boat moved somewhere in the darkness. Its oars dipped rhythmically into the water. Then even that sound faded away. The village gradually became silent. Lamps were extinguished. Doors closed. Children drifted into sleep. Workers rested tired bodies. Tomorrow would bring another day. Another sunrise. Another collection of tasks. And beneath the peaceful night sky, the Nile continued flowing steadily northward, carrying with it the memory of past floods and the promise of future seasons, while the people of ancient Egypt slept beside its banks, trusting the ancient rhythm that had guided their lives for countless generations. The ancient world often moved at the speed of walking. A person traveled by foot. A donkey carried supplies along dusty roads. A boat drifted upon the river with the current or moved steadily beneath the pull of oars. Days unfolded slowly. Distances felt larger. Journeys required patience. For the people of Egypt, this slower rhythm shaped the way life was experienced. The changing of a season could be felt gradually. The arrival of news might take days. The growth of crops was observed one sunrise at a time. And so people learned to live with patience. Before dawn, while darkness still rested across the Nile Valley, a merchant prepared for travel. His supplies had been packed the evening before. Clay jars stood secured inside baskets. Bundles of goods rested near the doorway of his home. The village around him remained asleep. Only the stars watched as he stepped outside. The air felt cool against his skin. For a moment he listened to the distant sound of the river. Then he began walking toward the shore. Travelers often preferred to begin early. The coolest hours made movement easier. A long journey beneath the midday sun could become exhausting. Every experienced traveler understood this. The Nile itself offered one of the most important paths through Egypt. The river connected villages, towns, workshops, farms, temples, and markets. Communities that might otherwise feel isolated remained connected through water. As dawn approached, boats slowly began appearing along the river. Some carried fishermen. Others carried merchants. Some transported grain. Others transported stone, pottery, tools, or textiles. The river was never completely empty. Even during quiet seasons, movement continued. A boat glided through the early morning mist. Its passengers sat quietly while the world awakened around them. Birds crossed overhead. The shoreline brightened. Reeds swayed gently in the breeze. The day began with calm and simplicity. Back in the villages, families were waking. Inside one mudbrick home, a mother prepared dough while her children slowly stirred from sleep. The smell of grain filled the room. Nearby, a clay oven waited. Soon the familiar scent of baking bread would drift through the neighborhood. Many mornings began in almost exactly this way. The routines changed little. People found comfort in familiarity. A predictable rhythm brought stability. The seasons might shift. Floodwaters might rise and fall. Yet some parts of life remained constant. Bread still needed to be made. Water still needed to be carried. Homes still needed care. As sunlight spread across the fields, farmers moved toward their work. The season was slowly approaching another important transition. Though the flood had not yet arrived, experienced eyes could already detect subtle changes in the river. The signs were small. A slight difference in water level. A gradual change in current. Perhaps a different appearance along portions of the bank. Most visitors would never notice. But farmers who had spent their lives beside the Nile paid attention. The river spoke softly. Yet it always spoke. A farmer paused beside a canal and looked toward the water. The morning sun reflected brightly across its surface. He remembered previous years. The patterns were never identical. Yet they often followed familiar paths. Knowledge accumulated over decades. Every flood taught something. Every season added another lesson. The farmer did not need written records to understand many of these changes. Memory itself became a valuable tool. Throughout Egypt, older generations carried enormous amounts of practical knowledge. An elderly woman understood which foods stored best during certain times of year. An experienced builder knew how walls responded to different conditions. A fisherman recognized changes in the river long before younger workers noticed them. Their knowledge lived within daily practice. It was not separate from life. It was life. As morning continued, the villages became busy. Children carried water jars. Workers repaired tools. Animals were guided toward grazing areas. The sounds of activity filled the air. Yet none of it felt rushed. Ancient Egyptian life demanded effort, but it often moved with steady purpose rather than frantic speed. People focused on the task directly before them. One repair. One basket. One field. One loaf of bread. Small actions accumulated into larger achievements. Near the center of one settlement, a weaver sat beneath a shaded structure. Fibers stretched across a simple loom. Patiently, she worked. The process required concentration. Threads crossed one another. Patterns emerged gradually. Hours passed. The cloth grew little by little. Much of ancient life involved this kind of slow creation. Things were made by hand. They required time. Patience became a daily companion. The finished cloth might eventually become clothing, coverings, bags, or trade goods. Its value came not only from the material itself but from the hours invested in its creation. Nearby, an apprentice observed carefully. Learning a craft could take years. There was no shortcut to experience. Mistakes taught lessons. Repetition built skill. Time transformed beginners into experts. By midday, the heat returned once again. The Egyptian sun dominated the sky. Light reflected from walls and roads. Dust shimmered in the distance. People naturally sought relief. Shaded areas became gathering places. Animals rested quietly. The pace of work softened. Inside homes, families occupied cooler rooms. A grandmother sat beside a clay jar filled with water. The jar helped keep the water cooler than the surrounding air. Such simple solutions made daily life more comfortable. Generations of experience had produced countless practical techniques like this. Small improvements. Small adaptations. Small forms of wisdom. Together they helped people endure difficult conditions. Outside, the village entered its familiar midday calm. Voices became quieter. Movement decreased. The world seemed almost sleepy. Only the occasional call of a bird or distant sound of labor interrupted the stillness. Then, slowly, the afternoon began to change. The sun moved lower. The light softened. A breeze arrived from the direction of the river. People emerged from shaded spaces. Work resumed. Life became active once more. Along the riverbank, fishermen repaired nets damaged during previous outings. The work required careful attention. A small tear could become a larger one. Repairing it now prevented future problems. Many aspects of Egyptian life followed this same principle. Address small problems early. Maintain what already exists. Prepare for future needs. The philosophy appeared everywhere. In farming. In construction. In food storage. In transportation. Preparation often meant survival. Nearby, children watched the fishermen work. Some asked questions. Others simply listened. One day they too might fish these waters. One day they would rely upon the same knowledge. The transfer of experience never truly stopped. Every generation became both student and teacher. As evening approached, workers began returning home. The roads filled with familiar faces. Dusty sandals. Worn clothing. Tired expressions. Yet beneath the fatigue there was often quiet satisfaction. Another day of necessary work had been completed. The village welcomed them back. Cooking fires appeared. Smoke drifted into the cooling air. The smell of bread mixed with the scent of vegetables and river fish. Families gathered together. Conversations unfolded naturally. A repaired tool. A successful catch. A visitor from another village. The condition of the canals. The topics were simple. Yet they reflected the realities of everyday life. A father spoke while repairing a wooden handle. His son listened. The lesson was not formal. The father simply explained what he was doing and why. The child watched carefully. Moments like this occurred throughout Egypt every evening. Knowledge passed quietly between generations. Not through grand speeches. Not through ceremonies. Through ordinary conversation. Through shared work. Through time spent together. Above them, the sky gradually darkened. The first stars appeared. The air became cooler. Comfort returned to the land. People relaxed. Some climbed onto rooftops to enjoy the breeze. Others sat near doorways. The sounds of the village softened. A dog barked in the distance. Someone laughed. A door closed gently. Then silence slowly settled over the community. The river continued moving through the darkness. The stars reflected on its surface. The reeds whispered in the night breeze. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise. Another day of labor. Another step closer to the return of the flood waters. And as the people of ancient Egypt drifted into sleep, the great rhythm of their world continued unchanged, guided by the river, shaped by the seasons, and carried forward through the quiet persistence of ordinary lives beside the Nile. The river was always moving. Even when the villages seemed still. Even when the fields rested beneath moonlight. Even when entire households slept through the deepest hours of the night. The Nile continued its long journey. Its waters slipped past reeds and sandbanks, past fishing boats tied to wooden posts, past farms and villages and distant temple walls. The people who lived beside it could not see every part of its journey. Yet they trusted it. They depended upon it. And in many ways, they organized their lives around its quiet certainty. Before sunrise one morning, the air felt unusually cool. A gentle breeze drifted across the river valley. The stars remained visible overhead, though the eastern horizon had begun to soften with the first hint of dawn. In one village, a baker was already awake. His day often began earlier than most. The work of making bread required time. Grain had to be prepared. Dough had to be mixed. Ovens had to be heated. Nothing happened instantly. The baker moved carefully through the dim light. His hands followed familiar routines. He had performed these same actions thousands of times. The smell of flour lingered in the air. Nearby, stacks of baskets waited to be filled. Soon, the scent of fresh bread would spread through the streets. For many people, it was one of the first signs that a new day had begun. Elsewhere in the village, a fisherman stepped outside his home and looked toward the river. The sky was changing color now. Dark blue was giving way to pale gray. The reeds along the shoreline appeared as dark silhouettes. The water itself seemed calm. He listened for a moment. The river had its own sounds. Soft ripples. The distant movement of birds. The occasional splash of fish. To someone who spent years beside the Nile, these sounds became deeply familiar. Comforting, even. They formed part of the background of life. The fisherman lifted his net and began walking toward his boat. His sandals pressed quietly into the earth. The village remained mostly asleep behind him. Ahead lay another day on the water. As dawn arrived, sunlight slowly spread across the landscape. The fields brightened. Palm trees emerged from shadow. Birds crossed the sky. The world seemed to awaken in stages. Nothing rushed. Everything unfolded gradually. Farmers moved toward their fields. Craftsmen prepared their workspaces. Children carried water jars. Merchants organized supplies. The daily rhythm resumed. Along one irrigation canal, several workers were already inspecting the banks. The canal had performed well during previous seasons, but careful maintenance remained necessary. Small problems often began quietly. A weakened section of earth. A crack hidden beneath vegetation. A place where water might escape. The workers examined everything carefully. Their attention reflected generations of experience. They understood that survival often depended on noticing small details. A repaired canal could support crops for months. A neglected canal could create hardship. The difference sometimes came down to patience and observation. The morning remained pleasant for a while. Cool air lingered. The breeze carried moisture from the river. Workers took advantage of these comfortable hours. Heavy labor became easier before the sun climbed too high. A builder repaired part of a wall damaged by age. A potter prepared clay for shaping. A carpenter inspected tools before beginning work. Each person focused on a task that seemed ordinary. Yet together, these ordinary tasks sustained the community. Ancient Egypt was built not only by rulers and monuments. It was built by countless daily acts of care. A repaired roof. A sharpened blade. A woven basket. A loaf of bread. The world depended upon such things. As the sun rose higher, the temperature gradually increased. The brightness of the landscape became more intense. Dusty roads reflected light. Stone surfaces warmed. Workers felt the familiar pressure of the heat. They adjusted naturally. Water breaks became more frequent. Shade became more valuable. Many tasks slowed slightly. The climate shaped every aspect of daily life. People did not fight against it. Instead, they learned to work within its limits. Inside one mudbrick home, a woman prepared the midday meal. The room remained pleasantly cool compared to the outside air. Light entered through a small opening, creating a narrow beam that illuminated floating dust particles. The atmosphere felt calm, peaceful. The sounds of the village drifted faintly through the walls. A child sat nearby, watching as food was prepared. Questions occasionally interrupted the quiet. The woman answered patiently. Teaching often happened during simple moments like these. Not in formal lessons. Not through lengthy explanations. But through shared work and observation. Many of the most important skills in Egyptian life were learned this way. By midday, much of the village entered a slower rhythm. The heat encouraged rest whenever possible. Animals sought shelter. Dogs stretched out beneath shaded walls. Goats gathered beneath simple coverings. Even birds seemed less active. The landscape appeared still. A traveler arriving during these hours might find the village almost sleepy. Yet life continued behind walls and within shaded courtyards. People repaired clothing, prepared food, maintained tools, planned future work. The quieter hours remained productive. They simply required different kinds of activity. An elderly farmer sat beneath a tree and watched the river. His hands rested on a wooden staff. His face showed the marks of many years beneath the sun. He had witnessed countless seasonal cycles. Flood after flood. Harvest after harvest. His understanding of the land came not from books but from experience. Memory itself became a valuable resource. He remembered years when floodwaters arrived early. Years when crops flourished. Years when conditions proved more difficult. Those memories shaped the advice he offered younger farmers. Wisdom accumulated slowly, like layers of soil left behind by the Nile. One season building upon another. Eventually, the heat began to ease. The afternoon breeze returned. Shadows lengthened. The village slowly became more active once again. Doors opened. Workers emerged. The sounds of labor increased. Along the riverbank, several boats arrived carrying goods from another settlement. The journey had taken time. Everything in the ancient world required time. Travel, communication, construction, farming. Nothing happened instantly. Patience was woven into daily existence. Laborers unloaded baskets and containers. Merchants discussed deliveries. Information traveled alongside goods. News from other villages. Observations about river conditions. Stories from distant communities. The Nile carried more than cargo. It carried connection. As evening approached, golden sunlight spread across the countryside. The fields seemed to glow. The river reflected warm colors. Palm trees cast long shadows across the earth. The most difficult part of the day was over. Workers began returning home. Their pace was unhurried. There was no need to rush now. The evening belonged to rest, family, and simple comforts. Cooking fires appeared throughout the settlement. Smoke rose gently into the calm air. The smell of bread drifted through narrow streets. Families gathered for meals. Children shared stories from the day. Adults discussed work, weather, and plans for tomorrow. These conversations helped maintain the fabric of community. People supported one another through shared knowledge and shared experience. After the meal, some families climbed onto their rooftops. The air felt cooler there. The breeze moved more freely. Above them, the sky slowly darkened. One by one, stars appeared. then hundreds, then thousands. The night sky stretched endlessly across the ancient world. A young boy lay on his back and looked upward. The stars seemed impossibly distant. His grandfather sat nearby. For a while neither spoke. They simply listened to the sounds of the evening. The distant murmur of the river. A bird calling somewhere in the darkness. The faint voices of neighbors. Eventually even those sounds began to fade. The village grew quieter. Lamps were extinguished. Doors closed. Families settled onto sleeping mats. The long day came gently to an end. And while the people of Egypt rested, the Nile continued flowing through the darkness, carrying unseen waters from distant lands and drawing ever closer to the season when it would rise once more, renewing the fields and beginning another chapter in the endless cycle of life beside the river. How ancient Egyptians survived every season, boring history ending. The night has grown quiet once again. The village rests beneath a sky full of stars. The cooking fires have faded into soft embers. The workshops stand silent. The fields lie still in the darkness. The boats along the riverbank drift gently against their moorings as the Nile continues its endless journey through the sleeping land. Inside their mud-brick homes, families rest after another day of work. Farmers sleep beside the tools they will use again tomorrow. Fishermen dream while the river moves softly nearby. Bakers, builders, merchants, scribes, and laborers all surrender their tired bodies to the comfort of the night. Their tasks are finished for now. The season has carried them forward, just as every season before it did. The flood came. The fields emerged. Seeds were planted. Crops were harvested. Food was stored. Homes were repaired. Children grew a little older. The river flowed onward. And through it all, ordinary people continued living their ordinary lives. Not famous lives. Not powerful lives. Simply human lives. Lives filled with work. With patience. With routine. With small moments of comfort shared beneath the Egyptian sky. The Nile remains beside them. A quiet companion through every season. Its waters reflect the moonlight. Its currents whisper through the reeds. Its presence stretches across generations beyond counting. Tonight, as the stars shine above the ancient river, the fields rest peacefully. The canals are still. The dusty roads are empty. The desert wind moves softly across the land and disappears into the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once and then falls silent. The sound fades. The village sleeps. The river flows. The stars remain. And the ancient world settles into a deep and gentle quiet. So now, let the fields grow still. Let the boats drift softly on dark water. Let the warm night air move through the palm trees. Let the sounds of labor fade away. And beside the calm and timeless Nile, beneath the endless stars of ancient Egypt, allow the story to grow distant. Slower. Quieter. Softer. Until there is only the river. Only the breeze. Only the peaceful silence of another ancient night.